Logan adjusted the crisp white cuff of his shirt and stared at his reflection in the mirror. The morning light spilled through the stained glass window of the chapel's dressing room, casting fractured color across his face. The tie was tight around his throat, but he chalked the discomfort up to nerves. Today was supposed to be the best day of his life. His phone buzzed, probably his best man. He glanced at the screen. Unknown. Number. Don't go to your wedding. Check your fiancé's garage. He blinked. A prank? Cold fingers of unease brushed down his spine. He reread the message. Once. Twice. There was no follow-up. No name. No context. Just that. A knock came at the door. "You good in there?" a voice called. Logan cleared his throat. "Yeah, just a minute." He turned the phone over in his hand. His heart was suddenly louder than the chapel bells. Alina. His Alina. Sweet, focused, fiercely loyal. At least he'd always believed so. They had built everything on that belief, but what if... This was insane. It had to be a hoax, a sick joke. Yet the message clung to him like smoke, its implications twisting through his thoughts, impossible to shake. What was in the garage? Why now? He imagined Alina at the altar waiting, smiling. He imagined opening that garage door and seeing something that would undo everything. Logan's jaw tightened. The weight of the moment was crushing. A quiet dread settled over him, thick and inescapable. Trust or truth? Love or betrayal? He slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and stepped toward the door. Not to walk down the aisle, but to make a choice that would change everything. The engine purred beneath him as Logan pulled away from the chapel, his wedding suit a stark contrast against the worn leather of his car seat. The bouquet of nerves in his stomach had morphed into something darker, something cold and electric that made his hands tremble as he gripped the wheel. He shouldn't be doing this. He should be standing at the altar right now, watching Alina walk toward him, veil glowing like a halo. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. But the message, it sat in his pocket like a ticking bomb. Don't go to your wedding. Check your fiancé's garage. He turned down familiar streets, the morning sunlight somehow too bright, too fake. Every intersection felt like a point of no return. A laugh echoed in his memory. Alina's. She was in their kitchen, barefoot in one of his old t-shirts, stirring pancake batter with a wooden spoon. "You're not even watching the pan," he teased. "Because I trust you not to let them burn," she replied, kissing him on the cheek. Trust. He'd never questioned it, but now he thought of the time she hesitated when he asked about that late-night phone call, brushed it off with a quick smile, or the time he found the locked drawer in her desk and she laughed, said it was just boring work stuff. He'd believed her, because that's what you do when you're in love. He gripped the steering wheel harder. Another flash. Alina surprised him with a weekend trip after a long work week. She said he looked tired, that he needed a break. But now, in hindsight, it felt less like love and more like a distraction. Was he just being paranoid? Was this message nothing more than a cruel joke? A jealous ex, maybe? Or someone trying to sabotage their happiness? But the unease wouldn't let go. Logan pulled onto her street. The garage door stood quiet, bathed in soft light. Ordinary, innocent. But his heart pounded like it was hiding a monster behind it. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, unsure. Logan braced himself. A man caught between two lives, one behind him, waiting in a white dress, and one ahead, steeped in shadows. Whatever was inside would change everything. And still, he looked. The side door creaked as Logan pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. A stale, metallic smell hung in the air. Oil, dust, something older, something forgotten. The light above flickered once, then stabilized, casting a pale yellow glow across the concrete floor. For a moment, nothing moved. No monsters leapt from the shadows. Just boxes, shelves, a workbench cluttered with the usual suburban debris, gardening tools, a can of paint thinner, a cracked flower pot. He stepped inside, his footsteps muffled on the dusty floor. This was absurd. But then he saw the table. It sat at the back of the garage, under the only covered window. A thin layer of dust coated its edges, but the contents on top were recent. Organized. Intentional. Logan moved closer. The table was covered in files, neatly stacked manila folders, loose papers, photos, receipts, printouts. A laptop sat closed beside them, its charging light still glowing. He reached for the top folder, hands shaking. Inside were photos. Dozens. Of him. Some were clearly recent. Logan at his apartment, Logan leaving work, Logan jogging on the river trail. All from a distance, taken without his knowledge. His throat tightened. He grabbed another folder. This one contained financial documents, his bank accounts, passwords, retirement funds, notes in Alina's handwriting, including line items of when she'd gain access and transfer through dummy account. The word leverage was underlined. Page after page revealed versions of his life he didn't know anyone else could have access to. Text message logs, location history, personal emails he barely remembered sending. And beside each detail, annotations, calculations, questions. When does he suspect? How soon can it be liquidated? Use emotional framing to delay confrontation. Logan stumbled back a step, the papers falling from his hands. His stomach turned. He felt like he was watching someone else's nightmare unfold. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a plan, cold and precise. He picked up a photo that had slid to the floor. It was him and Alina on their trip to Big Sur. She was smiling at him, golden sunlight warming her features. He'd taken that picture himself. He remembered how happy he was in that moment, how real it had all felt. The edges of his vision blurred. It had been real. To him. He sank onto an old stool, the weight of it all pressing down on his chest. His thoughts raced, desperate for an explanation that didn't come. Maybe this was something else. Some twisted misunderstanding. A coincidence. But it wasn't. The details were too specific, too thorough, too deliberate. She had built a life with him while dismantling it in secret. And he had loved her. His heart cracked open, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but slow, jagged. Like a fracture running down the center of everything he believed about her, about them. The quiet mornings, the inside jokes, the shared plans for the future. They weren't memories anymore. They were tools, pieces of a blueprint. He thought about the moment he'd met her, how drawn in he'd been by her confidence, the way she seemed to see right through him, and, he thought, still chose to stay. But now he wondered if she had seen through him all along, not with love, but with calculation. Logan pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. He couldn't go back now. Not just to the chapel, but to the person he was before this moment. That man was gone. He had died the second the garage door opened. And yet, beneath the swirling grief and fury, something else stirred. Not hope. Not yet. But clarity. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he wasn't confused. The red flags, the tension, the little gaslight flickers that he'd ignored, they all made sense now. He stood, knees unsteady, and looked around the garage one more time. He gathered a few folders, snapped photos of the desk. Evidence, not just for himself, but because he didn't know who else might need to know what Alina was capable of. Outside, the sun still shone. Birds still chirped. Somewhere, people were laughing. And back at the chapel, someone was waiting for a groom who wasn't coming back. Logan closed the garage door behind him and walked away. Suit wrinkled, heart shattered, but eyes finally open. Logan didn't return to the chapel. He didn't speak to anyone. No one asked why. He simply slipped away, his phone buzzing with messages, but he ignored them. Alina's name flashed across the screen several times, each notification like a hammer against the silence in his car. He turned it off. It was over. At home, he packed quickly, methodically. He folded his clothes, placed his watch on the dresser, and dropped his wedding ring into a small box. His fingers hovered over his phone, contemplating the cruel simplicity of a text message. "I'm not coming back. Don't try to reach me." But that seemed too kind, too generous. He didn't owe her an explanation, not after everything. His gaze flickered to the framed photo of them on the wall, their smiles frozen in time. He couldn't bear to look at it for long, so he turned away, leaving the apartment for the last time. Before he left, he canceled the wedding, the venue, the caterers. A brief, cold message to the best man. It's off. Don't call me. He blocked Alina's number, deleted her from social media. As the last digital connection vanished, Logan felt a weight lift from his chest, but it wasn't relief. It was something else. An empty, profound quiet. The car engine hummed as he pulled out of the parking lot. No destination in mind, just a need to leave. He bought a one-way ticket to a small town he'd never heard of, Bell Ridge. It wasn't far from the coast, quiet, hidden, perfect for someone who didn't want to be found. He left the city behind, leaving the chaos of his life to unravel without him. There would be no confrontation, no yelling, no resolution, just silence. He had nothing left to say. The cottage he rented in Bell Ridge was small, barely more than a shack with a peeling coat of paint and windows that rattled in the wind. The first few days were numb, as if he were existing in a world that was faintly out of focus. The life he'd built, his business, his apartment, the future with Alina, had slipped away like sand through his fingers. He couldn't quite grasp who he was anymore, who he'd become in her shadow. He woke each morning to the quiet hum of the ocean just beyond the cliffs, the world outside, still and untouched. His phone remained off. No emails, no texts. The only sound was the occasional crash of waves, the rustling of leaves in the wind, and the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower. Logan didn't know what he was searching for, or if he was even searching at all. There were no grand plans, no new ambitions. He wasn't trying to reinvent himself. He was just existing. The small, quiet routine of the town provided a strange comfort. A part-time job at the local hardware store helped keep him grounded. It was a far cry from the boardrooms and meetings he was used to, but there was something soothing about stacking shelves, about fixing a broken hinge for someone who only needed a quick fix. The people of Bell Ridge didn't ask questions. They greeted him with a smile, and that was enough. Coffee in the morning at the tiny cafe down the road. Strong, black, and simple. The barista always made a point to remember his order, never asking anything more than, "How's the weather today?" The days blurred together. The steady rhythm of small-town life, sweeping the porch, walking to the store, fixing things with your hands, was enough to dull the ache in his chest. It wasn't happiness, but it was peace. He began to notice things he never had before. The rustling of birds in the trees, the salt in the air, the sunlight glinting off the water at sunset. He didn't know if this was healing or just survival, but it felt like something. One evening, after his shift at the hardware store, Logan sat on the porch of his cottage, a beer in hand, staring at the ocean. The weight of his past seemed distant now, like a shadow over the horizon. He could still feel it, but it wasn't suffocating him anymore. He didn't have answers. He wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in months, he felt something like stillness. And maybe that was enough. The first thing Logan did when he had some time was fix the cottage porch. The boards had been warped by the salt and the wind, and the small wooden steps creaked under his weight. It felt like a simple task, easy to measure, to cut, to replace. But something about it was different. He had spent so many years managing chaos, solving problems that were already broken, that he had forgotten the satisfaction of creating something from nothing, of building. Each nail he drove into the rotting wood felt like an anchor in his fractured sense of self. One board at a time, the porch took shape again, sturdy and solid. It wasn't perfect. Some of the boards were still warped, and the wood didn't match exactly, but it was functional. And that, for the moment, was enough. The next morning, at the hardware store, Logan picked up the tools he needed to repair a broken shelf in the back room. Ruthie, the store owner, noticed him immediately. She had a way of watching people, a perceptive kindness that felt genuine. She didn't press him with questions. She'd seen newcomers come and go, but there was something in the way she observed him that made him feel like maybe, for once, someone understood. "You've been at that house a lot," she remarked casually. "The place looking better?" Logan wiped his hands on his jeans, avoiding her gaze. "Trying to fix it up," he said, though it wasn't just the house he was fixing. She nodded, as if she already knew. "Good. People around here like to keep their hands busy. Helps clear the mind." He let the comment linger in the air. It felt like she was saying more than she was letting on, but he wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. He turned back to the shelves, finding himself absorbed in the work, fixing, repairing. The tools were no longer just items for a task, they were metaphors. Each adjustment was a subtle shift inside him. A hinge that no longer squeaked, a door that closed properly, a shelf that was steady. He was reassembling the broken pieces of his own existence, one small act at a time. At night, after the store had closed and the streets were quiet, Logan started sketching again. He hadn't picked up a pencil in years, not since the days when he was obsessed with blueprints for glass towers and sleek office buildings. But now, his sketches weren't of glass or steel. They were simple spaces, places that felt healing, restorative. A small garden with a stone path, a cozy sunlit room with soft cushions and open windows, a retreat where people could breathe, could simply be. There was no grand vision, no final blueprint. His hands moved almost without thought, tracing lines that felt more instinctive than intentional. It wasn't about making something perfect, it was about creating something that could be mended. Ruthie noticed, of course. It was hard not to. She often caught him sketching during his breaks at the store. One day, as she handed him a cup of coffee, she glanced at the paper he'd been working on. "Planning to build something, Logan?" she asked, her tone light but laced with interest. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Not sure. Just ideas." He took a sip of the coffee, suddenly aware of how much simpler life had become. The idea of creating was no longer tied to profit, to expectations, or deadlines. It was just about creating. Ruthie studied him for a moment, then gave a small, approving smile. "Well, if you ever need supplies, I'm your gal." "There's something about a good project that can help you remember who you really are." Logan met her gaze. She wasn't just talking about wood or nails anymore. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I'll take you up on that." It was small, imperceptible to anyone who hadn't known him before. But for the first time, Logan felt the stirrings of something that had been absent for a long time. Purpose. Not in the sense of chasing success or perfection, but in simply becoming whole again, piece by piece. And maybe, just maybe, in a way, it was a beginning. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in warm hues of pink and orange when Logan heard the knock on his door. He had been in the middle of fixing a small window frame in the living room, his hands steady but his mind scattered, drifting in the quiet rhythm of the repairs. He froze. The sound didn't quite register at first, but then it came again, louder this time. He wiped his hands on a rag and slowly walked toward the door, his heart already beginning to beat faster, an instinctive reaction he couldn't quite control. He opened it, and there she was, Alina. Her once flawless features were now drawn, pale and weary. She looked smaller somehow, like someone who had spent too long carrying the weight of her own guilt. Her eyes, the eyes that had always been so full of life and mischief, now appeared heavy with regret, dimmed. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by an almost palpable uncertainty. "Logan," she whispered, her voice raw, shaking slightly as if she wasn't sure how to even begin. Logan's chest tightened. He didn't speak right away. His eyes scanned her face, taking in the girl he'd once known, but seeing the stranger she had become. The silence between them was suffocating, stretching longer than either of them seemed prepared for. Finally, she exhaled, as though gathering every bit of strength she had left. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," Alina said, her voice faltering but steadying as she continued. "I don't deserve that. I came because I—" She stopped, swallowing, her hands clenched at her sides. "I came because I need you to understand." Logan didn't move, didn't invite her in. He stood in the doorway, leaning slightly against the frame, arms crossed. He had no words. Not yet. Alina looked down, taking a deep breath before she continued. "I've been seeing someone else," she said, her eyes filled with a deep, consuming shame. "For months. At first it was just an affair, a distraction. But then it became something else. Something I didn't know how to get out of. I kept telling myself I would stop, but I couldn't. And when I realized what I'd done, what I was doing to you, I couldn't bring myself to end it, so I kept lying. To you. To myself." Logan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His eyes remained steady, cold, even, but not unfeeling. He could hear her words, but something inside him had already distanced himself from the emotions that once tied him to her. Alina continued, her voice cracking under the weight of her confession. I didn't think you'd ever find out. But when you left, I knew I couldn't just keep running from it. I couldn't keep lying to you, Logan. You deserved better than that. And I knew you deserved the truth, even if it didn't change anything. Logan nodded slowly, feeling something cold and final settle in his chest. A memory surfaced. A moment on their last vacation together, when she had laughed a little too loudly at one of his jokes, her smile a little too quick to hide something. It had been small, unimportant at the time, but now it felt like the first red flag. She looked at him then, her eyes searching his face, as if expecting something, anything, from him. The pleading in her gaze was familiar, but it no longer held any sway over him. It wasn't love anymore. It was a need she was hoping he would fulfill one last time. I can't fix this, she whispered, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Logan stood silently, processing her words. The weight of everything she'd confessed, everything he'd suspected, settled like a heavy stone on his heart. But there was no anger left in him, no rage, just a quiet acceptance. You're not sorry, Logan said quietly, his voice low but firm. You're sorry because you got caught. You're sorry because it's over. Her face crumpled as if his words had struck her more painfully than anything she had prepared for. But Logan held her gaze, unflinching. You don't get to come here and ask for understanding, Alina, he continued. You don't get to ask for anything from me anymore. You made your choice. And now, I'm making mine. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She only stared at him, the weight of her failure sinking in. I think you should go, Logan said, his voice softer now but resolute. I don't want to be a part of your story anymore, and I don't think you should be a part of mine. Alina stood there for a long moment, her breath hitching as though she wanted to say more, maybe beg him, apologize once again, but she didn't. She simply nodded, a slow, tearful nod, and turned to walk away. Logan closed the door quietly behind her, leaning against it for a moment. His chest was tight, but his mind was calm. For the first time in weeks, he felt a stillness inside, a sense of finality as though a chapter had been closed for good. And this time, he wasn't going back. It was late in the evening when Logan's phone rang, the sound of it slicing through the quiet solitude of his cottage. He glanced at the screen. The name Jonas blinked back at him. An old friend, someone from his past life, long before the betrayal, before the wreckage of his relationship with Alina. Logan hadn't heard from him in years, and for a moment he hesitated. But the curiosity won out, and he answered. Jonas? His voice was tentative, still raw from everything that had happened, but it steadied when he recognized the familiar voice on the other end. Logan, man, it's been too long. Jonas's voice was warm, a bit strained, like he'd been holding something back. I was just calling to check in, but I gotta tell you something. You might want to sit down. Logan frowned. What's going on? Alina tried to sue you, Jonas said bluntly, cutting to the chase. I don't know all the details, but I got the word through a friend. She tried to pull some legal stunt to claim a chunk of your assets. Say you breached a contract or some nonsense, but it didn't go anywhere. Logan's heart skipped a beat, but he stayed silent, letting Jonas continue. Needless to say, she failed, Jonas added, his tone somewhat reassuring. But I thought you should know. That woman, I don't know what she's playing at. Logan let out a sharp breath, a strange mix of relief and disbelief flooding him. He had wondered secretly if she might make a move like that, but hearing it confirmed, hearing that it had fallen apart, felt like the last shred of their connection was finally severed. Jonas cleared his throat, then changed the subject. Anyway, I've got something I want to throw your way. A new venture, man, something fresh. It's a startup, a chance to get back in the game. Thought you might want in. Logan felt a familiar pull, but his response was instinctive. Thanks, but no thanks. Not right now. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Seriously? I figured you'd be up for it. I know you've got that spark, man. I know, but Logan took a moment, his gaze drifting to the small cottage, to the quiet of the night. I'm not looking to go back to all that. Not for money, not for success. I want to build something that actually matters. Jonas was quiet for a beat. I get it, Logan. Just know I'm here if you change your mind. Thanks, Logan said quietly. I think I'm exactly where I need to be. A few months passed before Logan finally took the plunge. The town of Belridge had grown on him. The slow, rhythmic life that moved like the tides, quiet and steady. He spent more time in the local cafes, walking along the beach, and absorbing the serenity of the place, but he knew deep down that he wasn't finished. There was more work to be done, so he did something he hadn't expected. He bought a plot of land. It wasn't much. Just a few acres of wild, untamed terrain on the outskirts of town, nestled near a quiet grove of trees, close enough to the sea to hear the waves crashing on the shore. It wasn't the ideal place for development, but that's what Logan liked about it. It had character, something raw and untouched, and it was all his. The land wasn't perfect, but it could be shaped, and Logan had learned, through his own quiet rebuilding, that sometimes the most broken things could be made whole again. He began sketching plans for a retreat. No more high-rise offices or cutting-edge designs, but something simpler. Something that could help people heal, as he was healing. Stillhouse, he called it. A retreat for people recovering from emotional trauma. A space where silence wasn't empty, but full of possibility. He designed small, rustic cabins, each one tucked away in its own corner of the property, with gardens surrounding them, open spaces where people could simply breathe. Paths meandered through the trees, leading to quiet sitting areas, fire pits for evenings spent talking or reflecting. There would be a main lodge with a communal kitchen, a space for yoga and group discussions, and a small library for those who needed time to themselves. Logan didn't want luxury. He didn't want grandiosity. He wanted peace. He wanted a space that was as simple and natural as the landscape around it. He wanted people to leave feeling lighter than when they arrived. It wasn't just about a retreat, though. It was about building something that could give people a chance to heal, a chance to find clarity after they had been broken. He knew, better than anyone, how devastating it could be to lose everything, to feel as though the world was coming down around you. Stillhouse would be his way of helping others rebuild, just as he had done. The ground broke in the early spring. The first cabin was constructed with the help of a few locals who believed in the vision. The gardens were started with wildflowers and herbs. Logan worked every day, sometimes alone, sometimes with others, but always with purpose. He was building, but more importantly, he was creating. Stillhouse wasn't just a place. It was a symbol, a manifestation of his journey, a representation of what he had found in stillness, peace. And perhaps, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally living with intention. The past had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. The retreat was still in its early stages, but every step forward felt like a quiet victory. Logan sat on the porch of the main cabin one evening, looking out over the land that was slowly becoming something more than he had ever dreamed. The ocean's sound in the distance, the wind gently stirring the trees. This was the life he had longed for. This was what he wanted to build, not just for himself, but for others who had lost their way. Stillhouse was born, and it would be a place where people, like him, could find peace, a place to heal. And in that moment, Logan knew this was only the beginning. It was a quiet afternoon when Logan first saw her, Rowan. He hadn't expected company. In fact, he'd been alone for weeks, the project moving at its own deliberate pace. But then she appeared, as if she had stepped right out of the trees that bordered Stillhouse. She was a stranger, no more than a figure against the backdrop of the land, her hands dirt-streaked and her clothes a bit too worn for anyone to guess she was anything other than someone passing through. She looked at the garden, then at Logan, as if she had come there for a reason, but wasn't sure how to begin. "I saw your garden," Rowan said, her voice gentle, as though she was unsure whether she should speak at all. "I thought I could help." Logan glanced up from his work. She was standing a few feet away, waiting for him to decide whether he'd welcome her offer. He wasn't sure what to make of her, but something about the quiet confidence in her presence felt different than the people who had come before. She wasn't here to ask anything of him, nor to make any grand gestures. She simply wanted to help. Sure, he said, after a beat. Could always use more hands. He gestured toward the garden beds, now in the early stages of growth. There's a lot to do. Rowan didn't ask any questions. She just picked up a pair of gloves and began working beside him, pulling weeds and adjusting the soil, her movements measured and calm. The work wasn't fast or furious, but steady, like the rhythm of the land itself. She wasn't there to make small talk or push for stories. She was there simply to be. Days turned into weeks, and Rowan's presence became a familiar, comforting one. She worked in silence beside Logan, never prying, never probing into his past. But there was something about her quiet nature that drew him in. It wasn't about sharing confessions. It was about the trust that grew between them through their shared labor. She respected his silence, and in turn, he respected hers. They didn't talk about who they were or why they had come to Stillhouse. It wasn't necessary. Their bond was built not on words, but on presence. Just the two of them working, side by side, building something quietly, day by day. One evening, after another long day of work, Logan sat alone on the porch of the main cabin, the sunset painting the sky in rich purples and oranges. The stillness around him was almost too much to bear at times, but it was a kind of stillness he had come to crave. In his hand was the last piece of his old life, the printed email from Alina. He hadn't thought about it in weeks, but today, as the night stretched on, he found it buried in a box in the back of his closet, its contents as fresh as the day it had arrived. The words she'd written, the betrayal, the lies, the promises broken, had lingered like an unwelcome shadow, never fully fading. It had been too easy to keep it, as if holding on to it was some form of protection against the pain. But now, sitting there in the quiet of the evening, Logan knew what he had to do. He wasn't angry anymore. The fury, the sense of injustice, those feelings had all faded, leaving behind only an unspoken acceptance of what had happened. The email no longer held the power it once did. Logan stood, walked to the fire pit, and tossed the paper into the flames. The edges curled instantly, the ink turning to ash. He watched as the last remnants of that life turned to smoke, dissipating into the night air. It wasn't an act of rage. It wasn't about vengeance. It was simply about letting go. The fire crackled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Logan felt lighter. The last ghost of Alina's betrayal, of everything he'd been running from, was gone. There was no more weight, no more dragging memories from the past. He turned his back on the fire, and as he walked back toward the cabin, he realized that something had shifted within him. He wasn't just building a new life, he was living it. And this time, he wasn't haunted by anything.